Klee, Creative Credo. 1. Since graphic art tends of its own accord to abstraction, it is only natural that it should be receiving higher appreciation today. From the first, it can present the object in a more patterned, more imaginative, more non-objective manner, and hence with incomparably greater precision than any other form of art. The more purely we work graphically, that is to say, the more we accept the elements underlying graphic art, the less equipped we are for a realistic representation of things. A prestidigitator, of course, violating the elements, will create certain illusions, but that is no longer pure art, because it is at the expense of the real elements. Pure art arises when the element of design and the expression of the formal organism are in real correspondence with the spirit of the content. And in any organism, the parts stand in a logical proportion to the whole. Small integers underlie the proportion. We should not be misled into thinking, for example, that the picture of a naked man is organic only because the fingers are in correct proportion to the hands to the forearm and biceps, and so on. That is another side of art. It can, however, serve as an example of how to achieve analogous results when we are working with pure elements of form. 2. The formal elements of graphic art are dot, line, plane, and space, the last three charged with energy of various kinds. A planar element is not composed of dots and lines. Rather, it comes about when we use a blunt crayon with unvarying intensity. An example of a spatial element would be a cloud-like, misty dab of a full brush, applied with varying intensities. As has already been suggested, dots and lines placed in relationship to one another can also generate planar and spatial shapes. Let us develop these principles by taking a little jaunt into the land of better insight. Our first act is to move beyond the lifelessness of the dot. Soon we stop to catch our breath. This is rendered by a broken line, or one articulated by repeated stops. We look back to see how far we have come. This is counter-movement. We pause and consider the paths in various directions. This gives us a sheaf of lines. A river gets in our way and we must use a boat. This is a wavy line. Further upstream, there might be a bridge, series of curves. Across the river, we meet someone who shares our views, who also wishes to reach greater insight. For a while, we are in agreement about everything down to the smallest detail. This is convergence. But agreement will soon cease. Divergence. Soon we are all flustered, though he more than I. Difference in expressiveness of two lines. We cross a freshly plowed field, plain traversed by lines. Then a forest. My companion loses his way, looks here and there, and even sniffs the ground like a hunting dog. I too am no longer so cool-headed. There is another river and a thick mist rising above the bottomlands. Spatial element. By and by the atmosphere clears somewhat. We encounter some basket weavers. Texture of lines. They have a baby with them, with lovely curly hair. Corkscrew motif. Later on it grows sultry and dark. Spatial element. A flash of lightning on the horizon. Zigzag line. But there are still stars overhead. Scattered dots. Soon we come to an inn and put up for the night. Before we fall asleep, a good many memories bob to the surface, for a little walking tour of this sort is full of impressions. All sorts of lines, dots, dabs, smooth planes, planes animated by dabs, cross-hatchings, wavy movements, articulated and obstructed movements, counter-movements, textures, tissues, masonry effects, scales, solo lines, duet lines, lines fading out, and lines that gain strength because they are in the fog, dynamism, the blithe evenness of the first stretch, then the inhibitions, the uncertainty, faint tremblings, the caresses of cool breezes. At the approach of the thunderstorm, the sudden buzz of gadflies, fury, killing, the aim in view as a guideline, even in the underbrush, even in the dusk. Fortunately, the night did not descend too soon. Anxiety, fear comes seldom. Keep healthy. Don't take on too many burdens. The lightning flash reminded me of the fever chart of a sick child some years ago. I felt fear then. Now we sleep. Tomorrow we continue. 3. I define the concept of element as something integral in itself. We enrich the formal harmony by using structures composed of elements, as for example surfaces represented by lines entering into relationships. The view of flowing streams, for instance. Or else we may proceed from dots to lines, or create spatial structures out of lines and dots in third-dimensional relationships. For example, fish darting past, above and below one another. In this way, the organism becomes more richly articulated, and the number of potential variations becomes infinite. 4. Movement underlies the growth and decay of all things. In Lessing's Lao Kun, which in our piety we still go on tormenting our brains over, a great fuss is made about the difference between temporal and spatial art. But look more closely into the matter, and the whole problem turns out to be a pedant's delusion. For space too is a temporal concept. When a dot begins to move and becomes a line, the process takes time. Likewise, when a line is displaced and becomes a surface. Likewise, when moving surfaces become spaces. Is a work of pictorial art created all at once? Not at all. It is built up bit by bit, just like a house. How long does it take to build a house? And what about the beholder? Is he finished with the work at one glance? Unfortunately, he often is. Feuerbach has remarked that to understand a picture, a chair is needed. Why a chair? So that the mind will not be distracted by tired legs. And what usually makes legs tired? Prolonged standing. So the mind needs space in which to spread itself. In other words, time. Character is movement. Only the dot is timeless, and in itself it is lifeless. The universe, too, is all movement. On Earth, stasis is a chance, obstruction of matter. It is an illusion to take this cessation of movement as primary. The scripture story of creation is an excellent parable of movement. The work of art, too, is primarily creation. It is never experienced as a mere product. A creative fire flares, is transmitted by the hand, flashes to the canvas, and on the canvas a spark leaps up to the eye, forming the third dimension, and then, closing the circle, returns to its source. The essential activity of the beholder is also temporal. He moves part after part into his retina. In order to fix upon a new section, he must abandon the old one. Sooner or later he stops and takes his leave, like the artist. If what he saw was enjoyable and promises more enjoyment, if he thinks it was worthwhile, he comes back, exactly as the artist does. In the work of art, paths are made for the eye of the beholder, which moves along from patch to patch like an animal grazing. In music, there are channels conducting sound to the ear. In the drama, there are both sight and sound. The work of art arose out of movement, is itself congealed movement, and is perceived by movement, the movement of the eye muscles. The beholder suffers from the disadvantage of being presented with an end product. As far as the creative process is concerned, he appears to be going at the work the wrong way round. We do wrong to offer him obstacles instead of pleasure. The artist, therefore, should try for a certain transparent simplicity in the construction of his work of art. But this simplicity must not be confounded with poverty. The artist's sureness, skill, and deeper knowledge are in no way at cross purposes with this simplicity. A musical work has the advantage that it is received by the hearer exactly in the order of its conception, but when it is heard many times, the senses are dulled by the very evenness of the impression. For the non-specialist, a pictorial work has the virtue that the order of its perception may be strongly varied, and thus its ambiguity more richly appreciated.